Freedom of speech is the cornerstone of our democracy. The right to protest, the right to voice your opinions. But in recent times, something's gone wrong with that freedom. The world has been tricked into thinking that misinformation is more dangerous than censorship. If you criticise Rishi Sunak, you're labelled as a racist. If you criticise globalists, you're labelled anti-Semitic. If you criticise drag acts in primary schools, you're labelled as transphobic. If you criticise any government-promoted theory or narrative, you are labelled a conspiracy theorist. Labelling is designed to do one thing and one thing only. It is designed to shut down and undermine any opposition or questioning. We should be allowed to question the decisions that affect our lives. If we can't question our government, what hope is there for the future of our country? We need to be able to question the decisions that have been made on our behalves. Myocarditis in the young was only 4 cases per million before the rollout of the COVID vaccine. Since when it has risen to 25,000 per million. Questions should be being asked, if only to fix future mistakes and limit the damage caused by this previous poor decision making. I think it is time we had the vaccination status of anyone who died suddenly or unexpectedly published. How many jabs they had, when they had them, and what brand they were. If nothing else, it would shut up people like me who can see the data and can count. Asking questions like these leaves me open to being labelled an anti-vaxxer. So be it if that's what you want to call me. Call me an anti-vaxxer. I suspect I will be vindicated in due course. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, by the way. I'm an anti-untested new technology vaxxer, especially if the manufacturer is given legal immunity from liability. Forget for a moment whether or not there's any tangible benefit to having the vaccine. My view was that mathematically I was personally at almost zero risk from COVID, so taking an unproven, untested jab, which carried with it a variety of temporary and permanent side effects, up to and including sudden death, would only increase my risk profile, not reduce it. Whatever you choose for yourself is entirely your business. I support your right to choose. I also support the right to be fully informed before you make that decision, but I am not convinced that everybody was. There was a multi-million-pound media campaign to promote the take-up of the jab, to label anything not on message as misinformation. Much of it wasn't misinformation, it was alternative information. Anytime anyone denies the existence of an alternative viewpoint, we should all be wary of who's selling what and why they are doing so. It seems to me that the commonplace practice to silence freedom of speech is to label people. Divide and conquer has long been used as a tool of control. Pro-EU versus Brexit, COVID jab versus natural immunity, globalisation versus nationalism. For integration to work in any country, we need to find common ground, surely. Instead, authorities and governments are magnifying our differences. From race, religion, education, sex and gender, we are being pigeonholed into smaller and smaller groups. Intentionally, I suspect. If people are divided among themselves, they're far easier to control and will never unite to fight for what they may collectively want or need. The right to protest is enshrined in our culture. Back in the day, workers went on strike, marched en masse, and attracted attention to their plight. Things today are different. Small groups waving banners outside Parliament on College Green attract zero attention. Their only course of action is to get more creative, to close roads, glue themselves to art, petrol pumps, spray buildings with paint, climb up bridges. All these actions carried out by just a few people attract national news coverage, which achieves their publicity aims. I know their actions are irresponsible, inconvenient, and ultimately futile, but they work as a means of public protest. If the government had its way, we would be only allowed to protest with their permission in an approved location at a set time, and it would not work as a means of protest. I'm all for dragging people blocking roads to the side of the curb, arresting them and letting people go about their business. Blocking roads prevents emergency vehicles from potentially saving lives, and as such should not be permitted. The question is how we stop that form of protest without restricting other legitimate forms of protest. We are seeing many more protest groups, union strikes and actions. Their quest for media coverage demands greater and greater creativity to get their message out. I don't agree with many of those messages, but we as a country need to defend the rights of those protesters to protest. I would prefer to see authentic protests. For example, the Just Stop Oil Brigade should maybe consider not using oil-based products in their protests. If they stopped using oil first, they would perhaps set an example. I would assume that they travel to their protests using electric cars powered from solar and not from the grid. Their clothing, their mobile phones, every plastic and rubber component is derived from oil. Protest by all means, but if you are using oil-based products to protest about oil-based products, then much of your argument is lost. We've also seen a barrister who, by way of social experiment, went to protest outside of the Houses of Parliament with a blank white placard. He was subsequently spoken to by the police because of what he might write on that blank white placard. For me, this was a game-changing moment. Are we, as a country, entering thought police territory? I understand removing people with swear words on their placards. If you can't express yourself without swearing, then you should learn how to. Not swearing is more powerful than swearing, which only serves to highlight your own linguistic shortcomings. If a man can be questioned by police officers for carrying a blank white card because of what he might write on it, then we are surely just a short hop, skip and a jump from banning people from using social media, running a website, writing a book or a magazine because of what they might write in it. We've already seen social media companies throttle the exposure of posts and accounts that were deemed undesirable. We have spin doctors renamed as fact checkers, working to dilute any message that questions the official narrative. If you are not allowed to question the science, then it is not science. If you are not permitted to voice dissenting opinions, then you do not live in a democracy. If you are not allowed to speak freely, you live under tyranny. They said, you cannot challenge what we said today because it is the science. And that changed to you cannot hold us accountable for what we said yesterday because the science has changed. It is apparently still the science. We are heading into murky waters, and I fear for where we will end up if we don't change direction. The newly enacted policing protest laws have a huge potential impact on our civil liberties. Police have the powers to limit the location of a protest, the amount of people allowed to attend, and the duration of that protest. Potentially, this effectively gives the police the powers to cancel any demonstration that it deems undesirable. Freedom of speech is becoming an illusion. In tandem with our rights come responsibilities. I accept that. I accept the need to prevent green agenda lunatics from gluing themselves to motorways. I'm not sure what it achieves anyway, apart from to inconvenience more and more people, thus creating a greater tribe against their goals rather than in favour of them. But if those same lunatics were only permitted to protest in a field out of the way, then no one would ever know that they were protesting.